Okay, so welcome back to my channel. This is going to be my recap of Marry My Husband, Season 1, Episode 9. So, it picks up where the last episode left off. You know, he's already done the proposal, she's accepted, and now they're all kind of sitting around kind of congratulating them. So, of course, Sumi is like, well, wow, Min-hwan, how did you come up with this idea? And, of course, he never has an answer for his shenanigans. So there's a flashback of Min-hwan in the kitchen, and you can see him kind of going through his phone, trying to, I guess, figure out how much it's going to cost to plan this whole thing, this birthday engagement thing. And of course, he's balking at the prices. And so Mr. Yu walks in and basically see him. He can hear him kind of talking about, going over the prices. And he calls him to the office. And he basically said that the company will cover the cost, basically as an apology for the whole Mr. Kim situation. And if you haven't, if you're picking up at this point, Mr. Kim was the project manager, and he basically tried to steal Ji-hwan's idea, and they found out about it. And so I guess he's been suspended at this point, so we haven't seen him in a while. So later that evening, Ji-hwan is down by the water, just deep in thought, trying to figure things out. And of course, Sumi can never just let her be. So she walks down and have a conversation with her. And she's like, well, I see you still haven't forgiven me. No, I haven't. Of course, she didn't say that. She's just looking at her. And then, of course, Sumi, she apologizes again, saying that she's sorry for everything. And when she apologized, Ji-hwan ends up having a flashback of her past life when she was dying, and Sumi apologized. And she basically pulled away from her and basically told her that, I can't figure you out. And at this point, I really don't want to. And so she started to walk away. And of course, Sumi called out to her. So she turns around. Sumi is standing on the edge of the dock, and she ends up telling her that, I can't swim. And she jumps into the water. So of course, Ji-hwan being who she is, she jumps in after her to pull this fool out of the water. But of course, she's now in the water, and Sumi is now trying to pull her under, basically trying to drown her. So Mr. Yu hears the splash, and of course he runs down to the dock. And at this point, they're both on the dock now, soaking wet, hacking and coughing, and he's trying to make sure that Ji-hwan is okay. So they're in the house, and Ji-hwan has already spun his tail. Sumi has already gone to lay down. And Ji-hwan has basically spun his tail. They were talking, and she kind of slipped, and, she went in to help her, the whole thing. So the night is winding down, and they decide that they're going to turn in for the night. So Min-hwan goes to his room. He goes to get in bed, and Sumi is in his bed. And so, of course, he's kind of freaked out, and he's like, what are you doing? And, of course, she's trying to get down with the get down, and he's like, basically, are you crazy? Ji-hwan's room is next door. And of course she's like, well, that's what makes this so thrilling. So we go back to Mr. Yu and Ji-hwan. They're still up talking, and she basically told him that she didn't slip, that it wasn't an accident, that she jumped in on purpose. And so we flash to Min-hwan and them, and they already wham bam, it's over and done with. And I guess she eventually gets up, to sneak back to her room. So, Mr. Yu and Ji-hwan are still talking, and she basically told him that she basically dragged me under, like she was trying to hold me under the water. So the next day, they're at work, and of course, Ji-hwan is showing off the engagement ring, and people are like, oh, wow, that's great, because they think that Min-hwan is the man, right? And so, they're now, Mr. Yu and Ji-hwan are now on the roof, and he's basically like, why are you making a spectacle out of this engagement if you just gonna dump him anyway? And so, Ji-hwan is basically telling him that Min-hwan really cares about the opinions of others. He cares about being perceived a certain way. And basically, the more people that knows about it, when I dump him, it'll have a bigger impact. So Sumi and Min-hwan are in the kitchen, and he's basically saying that, soon he's going to have to introduce Ji-hwan to his parents. But he said, that weekend, his mother has a standing cooking class that she goes to every weekend, or every other weekend, or whatever the situation is. And so Ji-hwan walks in, and they're talking, and of course he was like, well, the man is supposed to buy the clothes for the dinner. So, and of course, his face is all twisted up because, again, he don't like spending money. So later that night, Sumi shows up at Ji-hwan's place with bearing gifts. And of course, she didn't let her in. So they're standing at the door, and she basically opens this box, and it's red pumps. And of course, Ji-hwan has a flashback of these red pumps, these same red pumps, at her door when she got home from the hospital and found her best friend and her man in bed together. And then she said that, she knows that she's not a very good cook, and so she signed, them up for a cooking class in the mall. And she, wanted to know if, Ji-hwan would be willing to go with her. And of course, Ji-hwan already knows that this is the same cooking class that her former mother-in-law attends. And so she's like, okay, here's yet another situation where she's trying to set me up for something. But she agrees to go. So the next scene is them. They're going to the cooking class. And the first person you see is Mrs. Kim acting like a Karen, talking about having issues with the parking. And so they go, Sumi and Ji-hwan go and set up at the station. And then Miss Kim comes over, basically like, that's my spot. So even though they don't have assigned spots, that's her spot. So they go over to the other side. And they get started. And she is impressed with Sumi's knife skills. She's chopping stuff, and she was like, okay, well, she was impressed. And then, of course, she looked at Ji-hwan. She's just taking her old sweet time, just cutting. And she was like, how in the world are you ever going to feed a family moving that slow, right? But what's crazy is, at the end, the presentation was outstanding. Even the teacher congratulated her and basically awarded her like best, I guess, meal or whatever the case may be. Now, what was crazy is that both of these people, Sumi and Mrs. Kim, stood there. They were standing there the whole time while she prepared this thing. But for some reason, they are acting shocked and surprised when the teacher is congratulated. Like they didn't just see her put that together. So of course, next they both making this shocked, stuck face. Like, okay, So that didn't work, of course. I'm thinking that's playing in Sumi's mind. So we flash to Miss Yang. She's working late. Of course, she's the lead on this project. So she's, going through the checklist to make sure everything that they need. And she gets a call from her daughter, basically asking her, where she is. And so she's asking the daughter to put the father on the phone. And she can't because the father's not there. So, of course, now she's trying to rush home. She jumps in the cab. The cab is now stuck in traffic. Surprise, surprise. Suk-jun, I guess his name is, he pulls up next to the cab on a motorcycle. And she ends up having to ask him for help, which he obliges. He ends up getting her home. And she runs in, and her husband and daughter are sitting there eating noodles. And, of course, she asked him where he was. And he basically said that he had some things to do. And then he ends up saying to her, well, what's the point of working on the weekends if you just gonna come home early anyway? Like, he's not the reason that she had to rush home. And then, unfortunately, we see her grab her stomach. So it looks like the issue that Ji-hwan had, Miss Yang is going to be, unfortunately, the recipient of that particular issue. So we go back to Ji-hwan and Sumi, and Min-hwan shows up, and of course he's shocked to see them together. And Ji-hwan basically said, oh, well, he's here to buy me clothes for the dinner with his parents. And of course, Ji-hwan has to lay it on thick, basically going over and grabbing my, well, babe, when am I going to meet your parents? And he's basically like, well, we have to plan it out. So the whole time, Sumi is sitting there looking how she always looked, crazy. And so she ends up basically making an excuse to have to leave. And so we see at the end of this shopping trip, Ji-hwan got bags on bags on bags, even racks on racks on racks on racks. Ji-hwan got bags on bags on bags on bags. And Min-hwan is sitting there basically about to burst into tears. So while they're sitting there, Yoon-ho called, and Min-hwan answered her phone and was basically being a jerk. And then he ends up asking him if he could cater his engagement dinner. So that's how he found out that they were engaged. He got off the phone with him, and then you see that Eun-ho is sitting there with the mean girls who actually wanted, I guess they were going to make plans to meet up with Ji-won to actually apologize, I guess, for all the decades of them terrorizing that girl while she was in school. So we flash to Min-hwan and his family, and his mother is basically trying to get the father to, she's picking out his clothes and trying to dress him, like, this wedding's not about you, and you need to put this jacket on. And so Min-hwan comes out, and he sees this whole thing, and then he's turning around and asks his mom, so Mom, are you going to buy me a house? Have you actually, looked at what, the cost or the price or some crazy? So the idea that this grown man would be expecting his mom to buy it, I mean, he's trifling, so I ain't a whole lot to be surprised about. So while he's sitting there, he gets a text from Sumi telling him that she's outside. So, of course, he rushes to get dressed. He runs out there and basically asks her why she's there. And she was like, well, come on, you know your mind. And he was like, well, I only have 10 minutes. I only have about 10 minutes. And she was like, well, I'm going to need more than 10 minutes. And he looked confused. So they done snuck off somewhere to do, right? So he arrives so him and his parents arrive at the venue for the engagement dinner. And of course, Ji-won has to make an entrance. And of course, she wearing something that nobody in their right mind would ever wear to meet somebody's parents, even especially for the first time. So he's shocked. The mom is now shocked because she's looking at her like, that's the same so-and-so that was at the cooking class that was, that she felt was so disrespectful to her. And so basically that entire conversation was basically about a woman's place is in the home. You're supposed to focus on, respecting your parents, your in-laws, catering to your husband, and raising your kids, right? And then, but at the same time, when Ji-won was like, well, that's, great, basically she was talking about she wanted to be a stay-at-home mom, then they got all up in arms like, wait a minute, you want to stop working? Right? And then to add insult to injury, she was like, well, I'm going to call you after I make an appointment with my doctor so that he can check you out, basically making sure that she's healthy enough to bear children, right? And then she said, well, we pray to our ancestors. They do ancestral rites or something to that effect. And Jim was like, well, I'm perfectly okay with that. I've done that for my father. And so, of course, Mrs. Kim was like, see, this is how I know that you basically wasn't raised properly, because that is supposed to be done by sons, not daughters. And basically made some comment about her dad, about how it's his fault that he has a daughter and something crazy. And of course that sent Ji-won over the edge. She basically told her, how dare you judge my father? And basically the wedding is off, and she storms out. So Min-hwan goes out behind her trying to figure out, like, what, are you crazy? Like, why are you talking to my parents like that? She basically told him that she don't want to see him anymore. That is over. Turns to walk away. He goes to grab her, and she did a little cute hip toss. He goes upside down and down to the ground again. And that is pretty much how this episode ends. So I'm going to leave this here, and I will talk to you guys in the next video.